Garmín má go caithfíorlaí agus fáilte agus inhearan na dála tá an coramíocht inscinna ceart. At long last we have the proper gender equality at the table, so you're to be congratulated for that.
It's not as good as it was last year, I'm afraid, Deputy.
Looking at the table just now, it's looking good. Yeah, I'm going up. Just first of all, well done. Thank you for the comprehensive. I'm not sure if there's a double message there and we're smothered under with the amount of paper, but it was certainly very welcome. Thank you very much, and it gives an overall view. And thank you for your positive statements in relation to social welfare, and that it covers a lot more than people on the dole, and it covers a lot more than fraud. So thank you for that. Would you have any idea? First of all, I don't think there are two sides to this: the social insurance fund and the social welfare budget. And this is 10 billion plus, roughly, is it? Yeah. Has it gone up, down? Do you need less money now with more people working?
Oh no, we need more, Deputy.
Why is that?
Because while unemployment has fallen, the population is ageing.
I see.
And that has created pressures on pensions. So, for example, this year, for 2020, even if there had been no budget changes in terms of rate increases, we would have had to increase our expenditure by 520 million.
In terms of other demands on your
budget? Other demands.
So an ageing population.
The two main demands, it's about 330 million, I think, on pensions and about 200 million on disability payments, both of which are related to ageing population.
And you clearly point out the amount of people that would be in poverty. Yeah. What was the percentage again you said?
It's the at-risk of poverty rate for Ireland is about 32% before social transfers. It's about 15% after. So it's about a 50% reduction.
Do you have a breakdown of the amount of money that we actually use to actively support the market because people aren't earning enough, or one way or another that we're actually actively supporting the market as opposed to disability payments or pension payments?
The main payment in that regard, Deputy, and there'd be a few payments, but the rest of them would be small relative to this one. The main payment would be the working family payment, which is 431 million per annum.
431 million per annum. That's the working family payment.
So that's what used to be family income supplement.
Ah, yes, the FIS, yeah. So that's now called the working family payment, and that's 431 million.
Yeah, so how many we expect that will fall in the next year or two because as incomes rise, there's a less.
Is that up or down on the previous year?
It's actually the figure I gave you, sorry, just the figure in 2018 for the estimate was 431 million. Last year, for 2019, it'll be about 416 million, so it's down slightly in 2019 compared to 2018.
So that's the working family payment to pay a family who aren't earning enough on the market rate, and they get that.
Right. There are 54,000 people.
54,000. Thanks.
Families.
Individual families receiving that. And then what other payments are there that are indirectly supporting the market?
Well, I probably can get the numbers. I just don't have them in front of me.
If you don't, it's okay, but I'm interested in that just to see what's the range.
I suppose that the main other payment would be the back to work family dividend.
Back to work,
which would be a relatively small amount, and we have what's called the back to work enterprise allowance payment as well.
Yes, I saw that one, and there was an undertake on that.
That's right. So the back to work enterprise allowance is about 70 million a year.
70 million, but there's an undertake on it, isn't there?
That's right. Well, as the employment market improves, people go on to that. Just on the working family payment, or on the back to work family dividend, the amount is about 16 million.
16?
Yeah. 16.
And the enterprise is 70 million, is it?
That's right.
And are there any other schemes then?
Well, I suppose there are a number that you could relate to. So, for example, children's allowance. Not quite, but you could argue
that's a universal payment. Yeah. Would it be possible, or should I do it myself and just go through, or is it easier for you to go through and tell me the list of payments and the money that actively support the market?
Well, the best thing to do, Deputy, might be if we send you a list.
Yes.
Rather than take up time here, because I could go through the estimates and start picking them out.
No, that's okay.
But it would just take up time.
So
but they're the main ones. There wouldn't.
Okay. Yeah. So just sticking with the accounts for a minute, and just a couple of practical questions. There's a scheme of prepayments on page 14 of your accounts, the appropriation accounts. On page 14, just what are scheme prepayments? And they've jumped significantly.
Yeah, the main issue there would be payments to community employment schemes, to local employment services, to job clubs. We fund them in advance, and the scheme and the other big payment that's a scheme prepayment there would be actually child benefit. And the reason it increased a lot at the end of the year 2018 compared to 2017 was that payment date for child benefit fell for 2019 just after the New Year's Day. So we brought it forward into 2018. And that would be by far the
we
biggest
have a
amount.
note again on that because it's a huge jump from.
Yeah, but we had anticipated it because of the payment dates.
Yeah, that's okay, but I'd just like to see a breakdown, particularly in terms of the community employment schemes. What's the other one called? LETS or?
LES, Local Employment Services.
Just say it again, sir.
Local Employment Services.
I just lost the letters yet, so I know exactly where it is because I'll be coming back to it. So if we had a breakdown of that, that would be good. And then in relation to, there was just another point here. Oh yes, unmatched payments in the same accounts on page 5. Unmatched payments. So I read that, and overpaid customers sometimes make repayment with insufficient details. So people of their own accord decide to pay back some money. Is it in an overpayment?
That's right.
So they're being very good.
They've been very good, but they don't tell us who they are, unfortunately.
Yeah, so that's what I just want clarified.
Yeah. So in the past, we were able to do better matching because the banks could tell us, you know, it came from this account and so on, but they can't anymore because of data protection concerns.
So how do they pay you?
They generally pay us at either a cheque or a bank draft or a direct funds transfer. Right. Mostly a direct funds transfer from their bank account to ours. But they don't provide the information to enable us to identify them. Really, they should give their name and their PPSN.
So do you ring fence that money then and hold on to it? Or
yeah, what we do with it is we do our best to match it against our own records as best as we can. Yeah. And that's an ongoing process. We hold it in a suspense account, but I can't remember the exact rules, the accounting rules, but after a certain period of time it will transfer out of the suspense account into an appropriation and aid, and it will be treated as income.
Okay, and then you go on in that paragraph to talk, an examination will commence during 2019 with the view to bring into account and so on. Has that started?
Yes, that started.
When did it start?
It started just after the audit finished, so it started September.
September, yeah. And when will it be finished?
Sorry?
When will it be finished? It's an examination.
I think it's going to take a year at least.
A year, and who's doing that internally?
It's our accounts function.
Okay.
So.
Lovely, okay. Let's see, was there anything else in that? Okay, that's fine. Now, I want to ask a couple of other... I've read the Controller and Auditor General's chapters, and I've noted you've taken on board his recommendations. And one chapter had no recommendation, but really there was a recommendation within the conclusion that you would simplify the online applications, and you dealt with that earlier. So you've taken that on board, even though it wasn't a recommendation as such. It was, without the name.
Yeah, it is absolutely. It's best practice, so we're trying to follow best practice where we can.
And you're working with NALA?
We work with NALA on all our forms and documents.
Okay, that's fine in relation to that. In relation to the Controller and Auditor General has highlighted that the overpayments are material.
Yeah.
That was a finding of his, and you've dealt with that already in relation to overpayments. Okay.
I think what I would give you, Doug, I can give you comfort, definitely. I mean, obviously we compare ourselves to other departments and equivalent organisations around the world. Our overpayment rate is probably... It's at the average or just below the average.
I suppose I never take comfort from anything like that. I just look at the Controller and Auditor General's chapter, I see what he's saying, and then I want to know what you're doing. And then I'll take comfort from that, rather than a comparator with somewhere else. Because that's really the basis of our work here, in addition to our own questioning. Then, just in relation to, he talked about the timeliness of payments, and you've given us a very good account how there's only so many weeks. And in fact, I asked a Dáil question myself. And the disability allowance seems to be one area that's not matching what you're telling me. So somebody on the ground who has appealed the refusal is waiting. We're being told there's a backlog. I don't see that here. So can you just clarify, is there a backlog in relation to appeals for disability allowance and the medical assessors?
The issue there is about appeals, really, Deputy. And I have a figure here somewhere. We do have a backlog in our appeals office. What's
the backlog?
I just hold on now and I'll get the figure for you. It's actually, Jackie, you have it there, I think, don't you? It's at this point in time, as at the end
Summary
of
decisions.
at the end of At the end of 2018, the backlog was about 8,900
8,900
Yeah.
appeals
appeals waiting
for
to be dealt with.
disability allowance. Oh,
No, across everything.
Broad, so for disability allowance.
But
I'm not sure I have the breakdown on that, but it's about 23 weeks for a summary decision and 27 weeks for an oral hearing.
Just let me get this straight. They apply in the first instance and refuse. That takes a few weeks. Or how many weeks?
So that's what the Secretary General said earlier on. The disability allowance at the moment is taking, we've moved that down to about 11 or 12 weeks. It varies on an average over
That's okay.
over the
11,
year, but
12 weeks to process the initial application.
to process the initial
Okay.
one. So when we get the answer then,
So no, it's refused then. Say it's refused.
it's refused.
Yeah.
Then they have the option to go to the appeals office,
Yes.
or to have a review. Some of them go straight into the appeals office,
Yes.
and the appeals office might deem them that they should go back to the deciding officer
Yeah.
for a review. There's
Yeah.
about 3,500 go back on that basis.
So you can go for an appeal, you can go for a review, or you can do both simultaneously.
Exactly,
So just give
yes.
me the times, please, for that. Why is it taken? What is it taken first?
So if they go to an appeal, that's what I'm saying. The backlog is at the moment 23. It's taking 23 weeks for the appeals office to get through a decision at this stage. Now that's not all of them, and I haven't got them broken down into this various schemes. That's just appeals in general. So that could be all of them. That would be an average of 23
What would be
weeks.
the longest that they would be waiting?
It depends on the complexity of the case, you see, because it could be, in some cases, if they have to have an oral hearing, there is a backlog on that, and that is taking about 27 weeks to get an oral hearing, which is too long,
Yes.
and we accept that it is too long.
What's the problem? Why
yeah,
is it?
well, I think the issue, Deputy, we have had a high level of churn in our appeals officer cohort. What we have done in the
I
past,
just missed that. Sorry, I beg.
we've had a high level of churn. That generally our appeals officers are more experienced officers
Right.
at assistant principal level. We've had a high level of retirement, so we've had a lot of new people come in.
Okay.
We have increased the cadre by 7 appeals officers in the past year to try and deal with the backlog. You specifically asked about the backlog on disability allowance. It's 1,700.
1,700.
1,700.
So they're waiting for their appeal or their review to be heard.
That's right.
For 23 weeks.
That's right. Well, on average,
On average.
most of the highest level of appeals we have across any scheme is actually disability allowance.
Yes.
About 16% of disability allowance claims will be appealed. On most other schemes, it's 1 or 2 or 3%, with the exception of carers allowance.
So
which
there's
is
a
another
higher
medical
level
one.
of appeal here.
There's a
Then
higher level of
you have to
appeal.
put the resources in to meet that. We're dealing with people who are seeking disability allowance. It's very difficult.
And that's what we're doing, Deputy. That's why we put another 7 people into the
Okay,
appeals
so,
office.
so just
It will take time to deliver the results.
what time will it take?
Well, the appeals office is a quasi-judicial function. They have to take decisions de novo. Generally speaking, it'll take 6 to 9 months for an appeals officer to really get up to speed and be able to deliver a full throughput. So unfortunately, I can't promise there'll be an instant response to putting the extra
But is
staff
there a
in.
problem with medical assessors? Is there an absence of medical
No,
assessors?
the medical assessor cadre, we're happy, is at a good complement at the moment. We put an extra 4 medical assessors in place this year.
So the problem doesn't lie with the medical
And they're
assessors?
getting through their cases in about 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
And just, are some of those nurses as well as doctors?
No, they're doctors that we've taken on.
All doctors, okay.
The nurses are what are called nurse attendants. So if a doctor has to perform a physical examination, they have somebody with them, 2 people in the room rather than 1 for kind of, you can see the reasons.
We understand.
I'm just looking here now. Invalidity. I won't go into an individual thing, but it's difficult as a TD on the ground, looking and listening to somebody. It's not even a role for me, okay? But unfortunately, we get in to put in letters, but only in relation to the process. That's what I see as my role. What's the process? Why is it taking so long? What should change? And going back to Galway, to people seeking a disability allowance and telling them there's a 16% appeal rate and it's higher than normal. It's not reassuring. It's something that should be dealt with. Highlighted, and I didn't see it highlighted.
Well, maybe if I can explain in terms of why you'd expect a higher appeal rate is the conditionality around disability allowance or around carers. It has the extra layer of medical opinion. Most of the claims that we reject are based on a medical assessment. So the person's general practitioner or consultant will say that, for example, John McKeown is incapable or fit to perform full-time work of any type for the rest of his life. Our medical assessor will look at the file, look at condition, in some cases do an in-person examination and form a different view. In nearly all of those cases, the person will say, well, I've got my consultant and we've got your medical assessor.
I understand that.
So that's why the claim, it's an obvious one to appeal.
It is an obvious one to appeal, but the people we're dealing with believe that they have a disability. Obviously, there has to be an objective assessment. I'm not arguing with any of that. It's simply the length of time. And the payment presumably is backdated, is it?
The payment is backdated, and they have access in the interim to the supplementary welfare allowance, what we call the basic payment in any event. Now, it's not perfect, Deputy, but it does provide an income support, which is very close to what they would get on disability allowance in any event. But the full amount will be backdated.
Just something that came up, and I mentioned it in a different context today, the Joint Committee on Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht have just produced a report. And in the report, they talked about the artist dole. Yeah. I don't expect you to have it in front of you, but it's on page 20. And during the course of this, I don't sit on this committee, but mention was made of the artist dole. You might just clarify that, because department officials informed members that the artist scheme in the department was scheduled to be reviewed after 1 year, but the department did not believe a huge number of artists were availing of the scheme. Can you just clarify what is the artist dole? And
I don't like the term dole, but
I don't like it.
I know you don't like it either,
back,
Deputy.
But that's what they use.
Oh no, exactly. I know you don't like it either, Deputy. I'm aware of that. The job seeker scheme for artists, or the artist scheme for job seekers, is what we call it. What it is, it's a scheme whereby we will pay people who are involved in artistic endeavour, and we have done the review, and I'll explain that in a moment, their job seeker payment without applying the conditionality of having to be genuinely seeking other work.
Very good.
And we will do that for a period of time. I can't recall the exact period of time, but I think it's about a year or two.
So that scheme is functioning. How many people are availing of that scheme?
Well, just to do the review, at the moment, when it was first introduced, it was confined to effectively people in the visual and written arts. We've now expanded it to include people in the acting profession and so on, and performers, as well as the people in the visual and written arts. Yeah, so
are musicians included?
Musicians as well, performers.
And how does that work?
Well, they need to. The Arts Council has a schedule of professions that they believe to be artistic professions. As long as the person is engaged in that profession, we will allow them to have access. Up to now, a total of 114 people have availed of the scheme. There's 67 currently on it, and generally we are expecting next year that will increase to about 300. So
66 are currently available.
67.
Nationally. 67. And you're relying on a list from the Arts Council?
Well, that's what they have, the list of professions which are considered artistic professions.
Okay. And you rely on that?
Yeah.
Completely?
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. Thanks very much. Now, public service card. I'm not didn't want to go into it. There's probably going to be an enforcement notice served on you. But listening to the interchange this morning, I have to say, and I welcome your openness and accountability in your general presentation, but it seemed to desert you in relation to the public service card, I have to say. That's just a comment in relation to it. And certainly, what was already referred to, the collateral undermining of the Controller and Auditor General, wasn't a comment that should have been made. I read that. I have it in front of me. I've read it numerous times in different contexts. And I think you should go back and read it, because the rollout of the public service card, chapter 10, and you've quoted elements of good practice, and that's right, paragraph 10.18, elements of good practice. Elements of a good practice business case were included in several documents examined. That's true. However, the however is a big one. However, there were a number of omissions or partially addressed matters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we start with the last one. A single project initiation document was not prepared. There was no plan setting out how and when the project's benefits would be measured and who was responsible or accountable for their delivery. Key dependencies were only partially assessed, and so on. There was no initial assessment of the DSP's capacity to deliver the project, and so on. Now, they're set out in very factual ways. Conclusions, highlights, I'm not going to read it out, I don't have time. But again, go back on the conclusions before your time, Mr. McKeown, and you can see why we have questions for value for money, besides anything in relation to privacy or other matters raised by the Data Commissioner, which I'm not going into. But under the conclusions, it was originally intended that 3 million public service cards would be produced by the end of 2013. 3 million by the end of 2013. At the end of 2016, or the middle of it, 2.5 years later, 2 million cards had been produced. Right, that's okay. The department expects to incur costs of up to 60 million by the end of 2017. What are the up-to-date costs now? 67?
67.
67.
So that's
Okay.
up to basically September 2019.
September. And then we had an activation cost. Is the activation cost of the cards included in that 67 million?
It is, yes.
It is. Is the renewal of the cards involved, included in that?
Yes, it is. Yes.
What's the price for the renewal of the cards?
Well, we don't charge people anything. The current cost for a card is, I think, is $3.35 per card. That's the department carries that cost.
And the department would carry the renewal of the cost?
Yeah, but it's included in the figures.
It's included in the six. Okay. Now, in relation to a business case, and you've put your hands up and said there wasn't, and you're going to do one. Why are we doing one now? This chapter was 16. There was 17, 18. Why wasn't it commissioned then?
Sorry, and I'll address a couple of points, Deputy.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I've already acknowledged in retrospect and looking back, it would have been much preferable if there was a single business case document. I think I would agree with the points which are made here in 2016 that the project had a lot of the elements of the business case, but not all of them. I absolutely agree with that. At the time, the Secretary General at the time said that we would do an estimate of benefits, which I have done now and produced for the committee. I think in the light of the concern that the committee has expressed about value for money, I think even though it's after the event, I still think it's worthwhile doing the cost-benefit analysis.
My question is, why hasn't it been done since the concern was expressed over the last number of years? Why is it going to be done in the future? Why has it taken so long after all of this concern?
Well, I think, Deputy, it takes time to evaluate the benefits. That's really the answer. If we did the evaluation without the, for example, I quoted the number of cases that we have found control savings on. Those control savings don't materialise on day 1 or day 2 or day 3. A lot of those savings have materialised in the last year or two. One of the reasons which was given at the last committee meeting in 2016 for the reason why there wasn't a very comprehensive benefits assessment was to allow that to happen so that we would have the experience on which we would do the assessment. I think we're at the point now where we can do that. If I can just comment as well, definitely around the point you made around the exchange earlier on and so on. I mean, I think I'd absolutely acknowledge in the context of, say, the language, collateral damage and so on, and a long report back of 470 pages, if we were to write it, would we write it in different language? Of course we would. I'd absolutely acknowledge that. It wasn't meant, and I was trying to explain, the point wasn't meant the way it was taken up, and I think it was read in the context of the full report. You'd see the point we were making is that the issue in question was the issue of the legality and the issue of the transparency and so on. And so that we didn't really see the relevance of bringing the report into the debate at all. That was the point we were trying to make. We may have made it clumsily. And the other point I just want to make about the exchange earlier on this morning and why, as you mentioned, I mean, part of what was being suggested, I think, was that the department was being deliberately awkward and obstructive in terms of its response, which isn't the case. That is not the form of the department. That's not the way we behave. We try to be as helpful as possible to people doing investigations. And I don't think it was fair to suggest that the department was being obstructive or difficult. It wasn't. Right. And that is why I'd be quite strong in responding to that.
Well, certainly the choice of words weren't great, and I'm going to finish up, but I went back to reread the data commissioners. Again, you're new to it, but in 2 years now. But you look at this and leave out privacy, leave out those issues because they're not for today and there's a case pending. There are many, many other issues that she talks about in terms of function creep, no overall plan, many moving parts. The public service card project is one that has many moving parts and a complexity of logic and terminology attaching to it that makes any analysis of it, legal or otherwise, challenging. And then it goes on and on and on. It was to start out as an enabler, which would have been great, an enabler for services. Where we've arrived at today is that the card itself, as a physical piece of infrastructure, serves little purpose as an enabler. Now, it's probably unfair of me, because you're not going to have time to go back on it, but these are set out in black and white in relation to different aspects of it. Function creep, ongoing shifting of policy. It is perhaps this ongoing shifting of policy and direction in relation to the PSC that has led to what the DPC identifies as a very fragmented and ultimately, in the cases we outline, insufficient and so on. Like, there are many, many, many obvious and significant deficits in terms of logic and consistency. So, by any level, this as a project, and again I emphasise I'm leaving out the privacy, which is an extremely important issue to me, but I'm not even going into it. This project was rolled out, cost of 67 million, the savings that you're telling us today that we will in due course look at of 30 million, without a business case, without a review, without a proper analysis. Nobody could stand over that.
Well, I think that definitely, obviously, I respect the views of the Data Protection Commission, and it has said what it believes to be the case. I wouldn't agree with a lot of what has been said, and I'd be quite happy to go into that, but I don't know that it serves any purpose. I would obviously disagree vehemently with a lot of it. The policy in respect of the public service card was set out very clearly in 1998. Anyone who reads the legislation at that time, or the debate at that time, anyone who reads the changes that were subsequently made in 2004-2005 timeframe, will see the policy has not changed at all. And there's been no creep in function. If anything, if there was a criticism I'd say would be legitimate of the public service card project, is that it didn't happen at the pace it was meant to happen, that there was non-delivery of mission rather than mission creep. And I think that's something which has obviously started to be addressed in 2011. And that would certainly be my view. And I don't have any, I wasn't involved at that time. I come to this new and I look at it, and that is what I see. And I'm very happy to have that debate with anybody. So I wouldn't agree with what has been said. And just because it's been said doesn't necessarily make it true. What I'd also say is, in terms of the business case, and I'd go back to this, and I've looked at the documentation, there is specification plans, there are project plans, there are rollout plans. The Attorney General has the list of the 17 or 19, 17. The CNAG, and has listed 17 of them. There were gaps. I absolutely acknowledge there are gaps, but I don't believe that the gaps were to the extent that has been suggested.
Just sorry, I beg your pardon, sorry, just the CTEC. You've rolled it out for 1 year more, is it CTEC?
That's right.
1 year.
1 year more.
1 year. Just in relation to that, again, as TDs, we've become aware of things. So you're saying someone has to be 12 months to
That's
3
right.
years before CTEC comes near them?
The CTEC doesn't come near them, we send them to CTEC. We send them to, so that's,
So if someone has a temporary contract with a local authority for a couple of months, they're on a panel for further employment, they're unemployed for a few months, that person shouldn't be with CTEC?
Well, that would typically depend on the circumstances. If that has broken their claim, if they've broken their, they would not. But if, for example, they were working a day or two a week and continuing to claim for 3 days a week, their claim is still a claim.
I'm going to come back because my time is up, but this is a very important point to me. I don't want to. I'm raising something where somebody is on a panel for a local authority. They're working, they have a break from it, and then they go to CTEC, but they've already on a panel waiting to be called. They're called, and CTEC gets the fee for the reemployment.
The reason for that, Deputy, is when we set the fees, and it was a tender competition and we benchmarked everything, we set the fees based on improving employment outcomes relative to the status quo. So if, for example, employment progression outcomes for people who are more than 12 months unemployed at a time were 12%. So we said we'll assume in our pricing that 12% of the people you're going to get into work would have got into work anyway. So the prices were set on the basis that that was built into the model. And in fact, we went further than that, Deputy. We increased the progression rate by 60%. We actually said we're going to base our prices based on 16% of people getting into employment without your help. Now, we pay you for everybody because it's very difficult to evaluate who was the person who would have got in anyway and who isn't. But the prices were set based on an assumption that was already going to be people who would get employment.